because it's fitting. Psalm 66 says this: "Make a joyful shout to God, all the earth. Sing out the honor of his name. Make his praise glorious. Say to God, how awesome are your works." I'm reading various parts of the psalm. "All the earth shall worship you and sing praises to you. They shall sing praises to your name. Come and see the works of God. He is awesome in his doing toward the sons of men. Oh, bless our God, you peoples, and make the voice of his praise to be heard, who keeps our soul among the living and does not allow our feet to be moved." I want to say to you today that this is true in my life. God is awesome in his doings toward the sons of men, and I'm one of them. And then in verse 16 it says, "Come and hear, all you who fear God, and I will declare what he has done for my soul." So I want to declare to you today what God has done for my soul. And the nutshell is, I am a sinner saved by grace. And we could all go home now, and that's my story. But I think you want to hear a little more detail than that. So I'll start with December 28, 1978. It was my 15th birthday. Saturday morning, the phone rang. And it was my former wrestling coach. I was captain of the wrestling team in junior high school, and this coach was calling and asking, "Could you come and referee some matches for a scrimmage that we're doing?" The scrimmage is four matches going on concurrently from all these schools coming together. He said, "We've got 3 referees and we need a 4th and couldn't find one. Would you be our ref?" I said, "Absolutely. I love wrestling and I live for it. I'm happy to do it." So I go and I referee, and at the end, after several hours of that, we were rolling up the mats to put things away, and I didn't get a chance to wrestle. So I asked the coaches, "Hey, before we put away this last mat, could we just wrestle around a little bit?" So we wrestled some round robins. And one of the coaches, the best of the wrestlers, for whatever reason, got pretty rough with me. I think he was trying to prep me for high school, get me tougher for the tougher competition. He was just slamming me around, and I determined this guy's not going to pin me. So he did what's called a head in the ribs cradle. That means he put his head in my ribs here in the side, and he had one hand around my neck, one arm, and one around one of my legs, and he just pushed with his head and bent me in half, and then he would turn. The idea is to turn them over and pin them. So he was trying to do that with me, and I planted my forearm on the mat, and I'm resisting him. And all he did was pick me up, put all my weight and all his weight into it to turn me over. And my shoulder made a sound like this. And he kept wrestling me over, and I said, "Do you want to stop? I think you just broke my shoulder." They said I was in shock. I was very calm. And he said, "Oh, I heard that sound, but I thought it was your headgear rubbing on the mat. We wore headgear to protect our ears from..." If you've ever seen cauliflower ear, you know that wrestlers can get that where it just fills up with fluid from bending the cartilage around all the time. In the old days, they didn't wear that. And he thought my headgear made that noise. I said, "No, that was my shoulder." And then I passed out. Came home from the hospital, from the doctor's office that day with my arm in a sling, and I was told that I will never wrestle again. That was a pretty bad start to my birthday. But it was going to get worse, because we got a second phone call that day. And that phone call was from a doctor at a hospital. Really not a good idea to give this kind of news over the phone, but the doctor chose to tell my mom that she has cancer. The tests that they had done revealed she has cancer. So happy birthday to me. A couple of days later was New Year's Eve, and we were at my uncle's house, and everybody was drinking and partying and celebrating, and I was feeling very discouraged. My arm was in a sling, and I believed my mom was going to be dying of cancer. So I walked away from all the crowd and the laughter, and I went to a room in the back of the house. I closed the door and didn't turn on the light, and in the darkness I lay on the floor with my arm in a sling and I had it out with God. And I came away from that experience with this decision. First of all, let me back up. I asked the question, why is God allowing this to happen? You know, more people turn their back on God because they cannot answer the question, why do bad things happen to good people? If a God of love is all-powerful, if he's all-loving and all-powerful and all-knowing, so if he's all that, why then doesn't he prevent these bad things? The only answer that most people can come up with is either he's not all-loving, you know, apparently he doesn't love everybody the same or he wouldn't let people go through this, or maybe he's not all-powerful and he can't stop these bad things from happening. Or maybe he's not all-knowing, so he doesn't know what's going on and he can't prevent it or do anything about it. That's how people reason, and they turn their back on God. And they say, well, many times the question is, if he is God, if he is all-powerful, but he still allows this to happen, I don't like him. I don't want to worship a God who could do something about it and doesn't, for whatever reason. I didn't really figure it all out. I just had those questions in my head, and I said, one thing I do know, life is short and uncertain. There in my young 15-year-old brain, I had figured out that I should just live life for all I can get out of it while it lasts. So I decided that I would embrace something, I didn't know the name for it at the time, but you would call it hedonism or hedonism, H-E-D-O-N, which means pleasure is the highest goal. If it feels good, do it. Because at that time, nothing felt good. I was just hurting. I was in pain. You know, when you don't have Jesus, what do you do with your pain? Who do you turn to when you're hurting if you don't have God in your life? And so I just determined that I don't want to feel pain anymore. And I knew enough people who were using drugs all around me that I said, I'm just going to do it. Up until this point, I was a straight-laced, goody-two-shoes, straight-A kind of a kid. Jock, held records at school, most push-ups, most dips, most reversals, most takedowns, fastest pin, pinned a guy in 21 seconds. You know, I was the jock kind of athlete, working out, very proud of taking care of myself. And in an instant, in a moment of despair, I decided to throw out everything I valued. And I was going to go into drinking and try drugs, and just so I didn't feel pain anymore. You know, if you don't guard yourself against those things, when you are at your weakest moment is when Satan can get you to throw out your values. There I was, in a very weak moment, and everything I valued up until that point, I discarded. And I said, I'm going to go a different direction. I think it was the next day or the day after that, I called a guy that I knew, a friend of my brother's, and I said, I'm ready to try pot. He and I were kind of close. He was an older kid that I looked up to, and he said, are you sure? I said, sure. And so he picked me up. We went to, my grandfather had some property with a little, we call it a shack, a little cabin and a pond where we would fish. And we parked right there next to it, and in his car, in that spot, I smoked my first marijuana joint. And I thought I was being smart because I knew I would only do this much and no more. I was in control. But you know, they call marijuana the gateway drug. And when I thought I was in control, I was not in control at all. If you think that you can manage sin in your life, and I'll only do a little bit, but I'm still in control, you're petting a little pussycat on your lap who you'll find out is a big tiger in the end. And Satan will get you sucked into something deeper than you can get out of without God's help. And so, I started with marijuana, and before long, I was doing every drug that I could possibly get my hands on. Not just doing them, but dealing them. Because only when I was high, up, down, or sideways, I didn't feel the pain. I would go to school, come home at the end of the day. By that time I was driving, the first one home. And because I was a fast driver. And I would zip home in my '67 Volkswagen Beetle, park it in the driveway. My dad would have already left to go to work because he worked night shift. And my mom was in her room at the end of the hallway on the right. And when I walked from the car to the door, I'm thinking, wonder how Mom's doing today. I'm turning the key in the door, I'm opening the door, and with every step I'm wondering, is today the day that I'm going to find my mother dead in her bed? And I would open the door and say a few words to Mom, and it just pained me so much to see her wasting away with cancer. I couldn't take it. So I would just say goodbye, go out on my mini bike, ride in the trails, get high in the woods, just trying to not feel the pain. I would wake up in the morning and start my day with a couple shots of whiskey and snort a couple lines of cocaine. And all through the day, I was either smoking marijuana or popping Quaaludes or doing amphetamines or dropping LSD, whatever I chose that day, all day long, going up and down different drugs and selling them in school too. And I pretty much continued that lifestyle after school too for 7 years, from ages 15 to 22. 7 years of my life wasted away on drugs and alcohol. 7 years of just trying to numb pain and self-medicate. You know, one of the reasons why so many people are drinking or drugging is because they don't know how to handle the pain that life has dealt them. And one of the reasons why bars are so full is because people are lonely and hurting. Well, while I was going through that whole experience, I started to realize that this is kind of empty. There's got to be more than this. Looking for the next high isn't enough. And I started thinking, well, I want to learn, I want to experience. I had deeper questions for life, so I started reading a little bit about psychology, philosophy, but it didn't take me long to come to the place where I realized what I'm really lacking in my life is a spiritual experience. I need some kind of a spiritual experience to fill the void in my life, which is true. We have been created as spiritual beings. We do need that. But I was not really interested in Christianity because I grew up in Christianity, and as some have used this term before, I had just enough religion in order to be inoculated to the gospel. I was immune to the gospel because I thought I knew what it was, and it didn't seem appealing to me. I didn't experience Christianity in a way that would draw me to it. Now, I got into teaching martial arts, I was doing yoga, and so, of course, those Eastern religions were what appealed to me. So I started hanging out at a Hindu ashram because I had a friend at the gym where I taught. Eventually, I was taking martial arts and then eventually became the teacher there. This guy would give me a massage every week, and he was a Hare Krishna Hindu. And he invited me to the ashram out in the woods in a remote part of Pennsylvania, and I would drive out there and eat my meals in silence and then stay for a chanting session, and someone's drumming and they're chanting, and just kind of take it all in. And I was feeling like I'm getting something, learning, experiencing new things. Of course, with martial arts, Buddhism was more the thing, and so I was reading about Buddhism. My instructor was teaching me a few things about it. I was meditating on my own at home and sometimes meditating in the dojo, kind of trying to live the Buddhist lifestyle. I had become a vegetarian as a Buddhist because I understood that if my body is healthier, my mind will be clearer, and the spiritual experience happens through the mind and mental processes. This frontal lobe is what differentiates us from the animals, and this is where spiritual and moral decisions are made. And so I thought, well, I need to be healthy, to have a clear mind, and have a good spiritual experience. So I became a vegetarian as a Buddhist. And I was doing all of that stuff and enjoying it, and feeling like I'm growing, I'm moving forward in life, but I was still partying. One day after class, I went to the sauna. And after the sauna, I sat in the whirlpool. And across from me in the whirlpool was a guy named Larry. And we just struck up a little conversation. It was just the two of us there. And Larry was happy and excited about life. He was in his mid-60s, I'd say. And he was just glowing with joy. And I thought, wow, this is an interesting character. It wasn't more than 5 minutes into the conversation, and I realized, I said, Larry, you seem to be really happy. He said, I am. I'm so happy. I said, well, Larry, I don't know what it is that you have, but whatever it is, I want it. And he said, I would love to share it with you. I said, I'm in. What is it? And then he proceeded to tell me about this New Age cult that he was involved in. You thought I was going to tell you he was a Christian, didn't you? I wish that more of us Christians were glowing like Larry was. I wish that more of us had the joy of life that he had. And I wish that I had met a Christian like that before I met Larry. But anyway, I met Larry, and he seemed to be so full of joy and happiness. And he invited me to go to this thing, and I went with him to a meeting down in Philadelphia. Drove an hour and a half to go down there and get my brain washed and get indoctrinated. Signed up, and for the next 3 years, I sunk thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours into this humanistic New Age cult called Est. And went up to the mountains of upstate New York for the advanced 6-day training, where they kept us up late at night, sometimes till the sun was rising. We were still awake. And they're telling you, well, let me back up. The first time you go to the meeting, they stress so much the importance of being on time. I mean, that's drilled into your head. So you show up on time. And you're sitting there waiting for the meeting to start. 2 hours later, nothing has happened. People are restless, complaining, yelling about, you told us to be on time. And they do that intentionally. Because that's part of the training. We told you to be on time, and you were on time. We didn't tell you we were starting at that time. You have to learn to just follow instructions. It's like you're in the Marines or something. They deconstruct you. Finally, when the training began, a guy stood up and with foul language told us how miserable our lives were and what failures we were. And they just break you down and tear you apart, and then before you leave, you're feeling great because they build you up with hope. But anyway, I went to the advanced training, and some of the things I experienced there, I wish I could get out of my head. Now, I didn't realize at the time. But in the end, basically their teaching is you are God in your own universe, and you create your own reality. Accept what is, stop and move on. What you resist, persist. These are some of the kind of things they would teach us. So I was going along with that and feeling pretty good, like I was really enlightened. I finally got, the guy that started it, by the way, he got enlightened on a beach in Southern California, and then, in the 70s, and then shared it with a few friends, and it grew to this worldwide movement. Somebody told me there was a movie with Burt Reynolds where it was so popular that it even made it into the movies, and Burt Reynolds was in the training, and when they called it the training, and he couldn't leave because you can't go to the bathroom unless they let you. They tell you when you go to the bathroom, and there's like, don't let your bladder run your life. It's mind over matter kind of a thing. And you should be able to control that stuff. And they even train you to wake up at a certain time without an alarm clock. Just tell your body when to get up. And we did. Anyway, it's supposed to be, I wish I could see the movie, it's supposed to be a funny scene where he's really having to use the bathroom but can't get up and go. That was so popular, it got into the Hollywood culture and in the movies. That's what I did for 3 years. I want to tell you how deceptive it was. And I'm jumping ahead just to share this with you. When I eventually did become a Seventh-day Adventist, I stayed in Est for 6 months. And I was trying to bring my Adventist friends to go to Est, because I didn't see the conflict between the two, and bring my Est friends to the Adventist church. Until finally I recognized that this is a humanistic cult that is opposed to God's truth. There's a story on how that all happened. But anyway, so I'm going along with my life as it is, feeling like I'm growing and learning, but I broke up with my girlfriend because one of the things, I was filling that void with motorcycles. My last motorcycle was a 1985 BMW K100 RS. That means it's 1,000 cc's of power and speed between my knees. And it maxed out at 140 miles an hour, and I took it there all the time. It's a miracle I'm standing before you today. I crashed a few times. And there were times when I could hardly walk because I was so drunk I would get on my motorcycle and drive home, not remembering how I got home. So motorcycles, rock music, concerts, girls, drugs, material things, expensive stereo system. I told you about all those albums. Just investing in stuff to try to fill the void and still feeling empty. During this time, because of my selfishness, I broke up with a girl that I'd been dating for a couple of years, and she ended up dating a guy at the gym where I taught martial arts. He taught exercise classes. He grew up in the church and left and went out and lived a wild life and is coming back because he found out that that's not where it is either, right? So he's coming back into the church while he starts dating my ex-girlfriend. She, by the way, was the one who cut my hair, and we all stayed friends, which meant that whenever she would come to my house to cut my hair, I still lived at home with my dad, she would come and there in that kitchen chair, I'd sit there like a captive audience, and she would tell me about Jesus. And I thought, oh, this girl's become a Jesus freak. And I'd have to listen. I thought if I don't listen, she might cut my ear off. So I'm taking it all in, but kind of making fun of her, laughing at her, snickering about some of the things, and disagreeing, arguing, trying to bring her to Est. And, you know, I just still remember her saying, Nathan, I just want you to know that God loves you so much, and Jesus died for you, and He wants you to be in heaven with Him. And then I got to the point where I said, well, I would challenge her beliefs. Why do you believe that? Why do you believe this? You know, she never told me, well, my parents said, or in my church, or my pastor told me. She always answered, the Bible says. And she would tell me what the Bible says and where I can read it for myself. I never met a Christian like that before. I was amazed. I said, Then one day she tells me, I've become a vegan. I've decided to become a vegan. I said, what? And remember, I'm a vegetarian at this point. A Buddhist vegetarian. Also into the New Age thing. And she says, yeah, I've become a vegan because I believe that's what God wants from me. I said, as I told you before, I said, no. The church I grew up in, everybody stepped outside to smoke cigarettes after service and went home and drank beer and then ate pork chops. What are you talking about, Christians being vegan? And she said, yeah. She told me about Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, of course, with the clean and unclean meats. But then she said it goes further, and she said 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. 3 John 2, beloved, I wish above all things that you may prosper and be in health even as your soul prospers. And I said, wow, I didn't know that the Bible had anything to say about health. I didn't know that God cared about how we lived healthfully or not. She said, yes, because He created you and He knows what's best for you and He wants you to live a full, abundant life. So that was interesting. Never met a Christian like that before. And that was actually the first thing that kind of made the connection. I thought, that's interesting. Here's some Christians that have that figured out. Well, I started listening and kind of taking it in, but I wasn't ready to become a Christian. That was not in my mind at all. I told you I worked for Tyler Pipe in Pennsylvania. And I started as a janitor, and I learned almost every job in that place, so I could do almost anything. If someone's on vacation, I could do their job. And then I ended up, my main job was as the cupola operator, or the furnace that we melted the iron in, I ran it. I and another guy would read the smoke every half hour that's coming out. We'd take a sample and we would analyze it, and then we would take an iron sample every 15 after and 15 before the hour, and we would pour it into a little cup connected to a computer and analyze that, and that would help us understand if we need to add more limestone, more coke, more coal, or how do we change it up to get the iron just right. So I did that in the daytime from 7 to 4, 7:30 to 4. But every 3 weeks we would get a railroad car with a shipment of these little pea-sized clay pellets. And we would shoot those through a fire hose mixed with water at the inside of the furnace to line it with clay, because you know from Daniel 2 that clay and iron don't mix. And that's how we kept the furnace from melting through with that molten iron. Well, that had to be emptied every 3 weeks. And it was done one half Monday night and one half Tuesday night. And one guy ran the forklift to bring the bins, fill it from the railroad car to the place where he would hook it up to the crane, and I was the crane operator who would lift it and put it in the storage bins. Well, and it ran with a conveyor belt at the top. And the way I was trying to move that conveyor belt, the cable on the crane came off of the pulley. Now, this isn't the kind of crane you drive around. This is a stable, they call it a bridge crane. Okay? It just goes, it's in a cab that's connected to a big, high thing, and you can move it forward or backward, and you can lift up and down. So I'm up there about 50 feet in the air, and the cable pops off the pulley, and I'm thinking, oh, it's 10 o'clock at night. I have at least till midnight to go before I finish this first half of the railroad car. Let me just get out there and fix it myself, because I don't want to wait for a maintenance guy to come do this. So I turned off the power in the cab of the crane, and I stepped outside onto a catwalk, 50 feet up in the air, walking on this catwalk, and I go over to where the pulley is messed up. And I can't quite reach the cable to put it on the pulley. But I thought if I hold on to this ladder that's part of the catwalk, and I reach out and lean on that beam, then I can grab the pulley and... So I did that. I was wearing leather welder's gloves, and there were some holes in those gloves. And as soon as I leaned onto that beam that I thought was just a beam, 440 volts of electricity surged through my body. Because that beam happened to be the monorail that ran that crane. It was like touching the third rail of a train. And as soon as I touched it, the first thing that flashed through my mind was, I'm dead. I mean, I don't know how to describe what it feels like to have 440 volts just blow through your body like that. And I didn't die. And of course I couldn't let go. I'm leaning on hard with all my weight on this. And this hand, the electricity makes the muscles clench, so I'm clenched on here. And I'm standing and shaking like this. My whole body is shaking. I can't call out, but I'm groaning uncontrollably. And I'm thinking, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. And I didn't die, and I waited. How long can I take this before I die? And then my mind went somewhere else. Two thoughts started racing through my mind. Number one, I wish I could get down off of this thing and tell my family I love them and I'm sorry for all the pain I caused them. Because the way I was living was hurting them, the people who love me the most. And I was facing death now and thinking, I'm going to die, and I wish I could tell them I love them and I'm sorry. I want to tell you, life is too short to hold on to things that need to be said. Somebody here today may need to go make a phone call. Please wait, don't do it now, wait till I finish. Or write a letter, or go make a visit and talk to somebody. I don't know, but life is too short to leave these things unsaid. Because when I came to the end of my life, I was thinking, I wish I had done this. The second thing that was flashing through my mind was, I'm going to die and I'm not ready to meet God. And with all those thoughts racing through my mind, I waited to die. When suddenly, I felt somebody slap my left hand, knock it off, break that grip. And then, all my weight was this way, but I slipped. And I told you I was 50 feet up in the air, but I only fell about 8 feet because there was a catwalk below me. I landed on my bottom, so I wasn't hurt. And the guys on the ground that saw it happen came running up the stairs up into that area and said, "What happened, Krause?" And I told them. He said, well, the supervisor came up. He said, "You've got to go to the hospital." I said, "No, I think I'm fine." I smelled burnt flesh, which is a smell you get to know when you work in an iron foundry. I have some skin grafts on my leg here. These guys get burned a lot, and you know that smell. It's a unique smell, the smell of burnt flesh. And I smelled that, but I didn't know what it was. I said, well, maybe my leather gloves. That's what I'm smelling. All I had was a little blister on my thumb where I had a hole in my glove. And they said, well, really, we got to get you in the hospital to get checked out. I said, I'm fine. You know, when you're 21, you think you're invincible. I said, just give me 5 minutes to rest, and then I'll get back to work. We'll get this job knocked out, and then I can go home. That was 10 o'clock at night. By midnight, I finished the job. I punched out. I went and I took a shower. And I was walking toward my car to go home when the boss called me and said, no, come in, you have to talk. If you won't go to the hospital, at least I want you to talk to a doctor. So he puts me on the phone with a doctor from the emergency room at the local hospital, and he says, tell him what happened. I told the doctor what happened, and he said, well, you've got to get in here right away. I said, no, Doc, I've been working since early this morning. I just want to go home and sleep. I'm not coming to the hospital. He said, no. You've got to come in. We've got to check you out. I said, no, Doc, I'm not coming in. He said, look, you don't walk away from something like this. You must come in and be examined. I said, I'm not coming in. I'm too tired. I want to go home and sleep. And he said, you're an idiot. And I said, whatever. And I hung up the phone and I went home to sleep. When I got home, I didn't really know how to pray, but I knew that God saved my life. Because nobody was there, but somebody slapped my hand. Very clearly, I couldn't let go, and somebody slapped my hand. So I believe that God sent an angel. Now remember, Susan was witnessing to me all this time, and I'm getting Christianity pumped into my head, but not accepting it. And now I'm thinking, well, God must have sent an angel to me. So even though I didn't really know how to pray, I slept on a futon, and I knelt by my futon that night, and I thanked God for saving my life. And I went to bed. The next day I got up and went to work, and everybody in the whole place was talking about, Krause, what happened last night? And I told them. So then, by this point, the office administrators had said, look, you must go to the hospital. I said, really? They said, yes, you must go. I said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll go after work today. Just let me finish my job, and then instead of doing the second half of the railroad car, you can get somebody else to run the crane tonight, and then I'll go to the hospital. So they said, okay, we can let you do that. So I went to the hospital after work. By the way, I want to tell you something. Recently, I was in Tyler in my travels. I was at the Tyler church, and then the day before, on Friday, I was there in Tyler. And I went to Tyler Pipe, thinking that maybe they have some record, because I wanted to find out what the amperage was on that crane, and I wanted to know the exact date this happened. All I know was a Monday night in August of 1985. And you know, it was like, I couldn't even get past security to get into I couldn't get in there to talk to anybody. I said, I went, and finally on the phone I talked to somebody, and she said, we wouldn't have any records of that unless it's on microfiche somewhere, and we're not going to look for it. Okay. But I went to the hospital after work because they insisted on going. And the doctors asked me what happened, and I told them, and he said, so where did it go into your body? They took some blood samples right away. I said, well, I have this blister here on my thumb where I touched the monorail, and I had a hole in the glove there, and it's a blister. Big, high, but not very big around. And he said, okay, first thing he did was take a scissors and jab in there and cut it open, and underneath that blister bubble, it was all black, like charcoal, almost down to the bone. I said, oh, that's what I smelled. So he just like scraped all that out and said, we're going to have to do a skin graft here. I said, okay, well, I've gotten some of those already. I know what that's all about. Then he said, okay, where's the exit wound? What are you talking about? He said, there's always a small entry point when you get electrocuted and a large exit wound where it blows out of your body. I said, no, there's nothing like that. He said, of course there is. There always is. Okay, well, I don't know anything. I don't think there is. And he searched me head to toe and didn't find one. Called in a second doctor, and they're both scratching their heads. Said, well, do you mind if we call in a third doctor? I said, you guys are the doctors. Whatever you have to do, do it. So they call in the third doctor, and they're all three of them scratching their heads and saying, this is unbelievable. We've never seen anything like this before. So I said, well, maybe I'm still charged. Maybe the electricity never left my body. I'm still charged with 440 volts. And they just said, well, we've got to run some more tests. And by then, they had me all monitored, wired, to check my heart. And they came back with the blood work results. They said, we measured something called your CPK count. I don't know if any of you are medical people,
Yes,
Dr. Bill would know.
What was it?
This is what measures the electrolytes in your blood, and
I know what it is.
determines, I'm telling the others,
Oh.
it determines how much muscle damage occurred, right? And so the doctor said to me, now 30 would be really low, 300 would be really high. Yours is over 3,000.
Oh, no.
He said, if you hadn't come in here, you would have died of kidney failure.
Yes.
I said, oh, okay. So they started having me drink lots of fluids by mouth, orally, and then hooked me up to the IV and pumping fluids that way. But I knew enough to know that they were also concerned about, since they told me that, what they didn't know was that skeletal muscle or cardiac muscle that was damaged, or both. So they're worried about my heart. So they said, we're going to have to observe you for a few days. This is a Tuesday afternoon. I said, Doc, you can admit me, but I got to get out of here by Friday. He said, you'll go home and we'll tell you you can go home. I said, no, I'm getting out of here by Friday. I said, I've got a big party planned at my house. I've invited over 300 people. I've reserved 6 kegs of beer. My friends in a rock band are playing. My martial arts school is doing a demo. This is too big to call off. The word is out. We lived out in the country and could have it out in the field. And he said, you'll go home when we tell you. I did go home on Friday afternoon, by the way. But while I was in there, I thought I'd have a little fun with my meditation. I started meditating when no one was around, and I got my heartbeat really low, like down below 40. And the nurses at the station saw my thing, slow down, and they would come running in, are you okay? And I would start laughing, and then they would go beep, beep, beep real fast again. And I was kind of just having a lot of fun with this, and they were worried that I was in big trouble. In the end, I was discharged. They said, we can't explain it all, but numbers are back to normal, and we don't know why you don't have an exit wound, but you can go home. I went home Friday afternoon. My buddy and I got everything set up for the party. The party happened on Saturday. My martial arts instructor chipped my tooth with a sword when he cut half of an apple in half. After he had cut the apple in half on my throat, put half of it in my mouth. And that wasn't part of the plan, but I didn't want to say no, and then he chipped a tooth, so I shouldn't have had the party. I had a chipped tooth. No, it got fixed. But anyway, my point is, God saved my life on Monday night. And by Saturday, I was already back into a partying mode. How quickly we return. The proverb says a dog returns to his own vomit. There I was, back into that. But I could never shake that haunting realization that God saved my life when I was going to be dead. And I started processing it and thinking it through, and I said, I was so afraid to die, and I had no peace when that was happening. My black belt didn't matter. Confucius didn't matter. Buddha didn't matter. Millions of Hindu gods didn't matter. My New Age guru didn't matter. Motorcycles and girls and music and psychology and philosophy and everything I had invested in didn't give me any peace when I was facing death. And I thought about it and I said, Susan has peace. By the way, the guy Larry that I told you about, who seemed to have so much joy in his life, that was short-lived. I watched him cry like a baby when his life fell apart because he didn't live by God's principles. So there are times when people think they find joy. There's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is death. And that was the case with the New Age happy guy. Okay, so I'm thinking Susan seems to have peace. Maybe there's something to her religion. And they started being a little more open to it. So she started sharing things with me to read. One of the things she shared was a book about the Sabbath and how it was changed from Saturday to Sunday, the history of the Sabbath. And I read that with great interest because I'd never heard of anything before. Now, as a little boy, I would sit in church and hear them talk about the seventh day when they'd read Scripture. And I thought, well, okay, Sunday, Monday, and I'd add it all up. I'd say, Saturday is the seventh day. Why are we here on Sunday, the first day? And I always dismissed it and thought, well, I'm sure the church leaders haven't figured out. There must be a good reason. And I just left it at that. But now I'm reading this book about what really happened with the Sabbath. And I'm not kidding you. I felt like I was holding treasure in my hands because I'd never heard of anything like this before. And I said, this is unbelievable. There is a day that God blessed, and most of the world is missing out on it. But if I keep this day holy, there's a blessing in it for me. I'm going to start keeping the Sabbath. So Friday night, my friends would call and say, let's go out and party. And I'd say, nah. And I would stay home and read the Bible or read something Susan had given me. Saturday morning, I'd wake up and I would go walk in the woods on the mountainside where I grew up, my grandfather's property of acres and acres. And then I would spend the day in nature. I would watch the sun set over the Lehigh Valley on Saturday night and just enjoy my time in nature. And as soon as the Sabbath was over, I would go home and call my friends and say, let's go party. So remember what I told you earlier about people who aren't ready to take the whole Adventist pill all at once? I was ready to embrace the Sabbath, and I was enjoying it. But I was not even a committed Christian at the time. I'm so glad that God meets us where we are. I'm also so glad that He doesn't leave us where He finds us. But at that point, I was just a Sabbath keeper. That's all I knew. I wasn't even really keeping the Christian lifestyle. In the end, I realized that God was calling me to a different lifestyle, and I gave that all up. So it took several months. I told you that was August of '85 when I had the accident, and God's working. And December 28, 1985, remember that date? I started with December 28, 1978. 7 years later, it's my 22nd birthday. It's a Saturday morning. And I got up without any plans to do so. I decided, I think I'll go to church today. Susan had been inviting me to go and hear this preacher at the Allentown Seventh-day Adventist Church. She said, we have this guy, he's a British guy with an accent. The accent's not as noticeable anymore as it was then. His name is Derek Morris, and he's a great preacher, and you should just come hear him. And so I decided that day, okay, I'll go to church and hear Susan's preacher. So I went to church, and Derek Morris wasn't there. He was preaching in Albany, Maryland, which was the church that I would later pastor for 12 and a half years, because he was visiting relatives there. And later, I became his pastor in that church when he took a call to the general conference and went local there. So full circle came around. But I didn't get to hear Derek Morris that December 28, 1985. Instead, I heard Elder Ed Reeser, head elder, preach a sermon called, "There Went Into That Grove a Farmer, There Came Out a Preacher." You know what that was about, right? William Miller in the beginning of the Advent movement. Before I even stepped foot in an Adventist church, I pretty much knew everything that Adventists believed, because Susan had shared it all with me, and it all made sense. But I just wasn't attending church. I went to hear Derek, I heard Ed, and I heard that sermon, and I said, this is not just a church that worships on the right day of the week and has the right doctrines. This is a worldwide movement that God is leading, and I want to be a part of it. Because once I heard the beginning and how it all started, I said, it all makes sense. This is God's movement. And I'm like, how do I sign up? Where do I get on board? I'm ready to be baptized. And they said, slow down. And so that same chair where I would sit to have my hair cut, and Susan would give me the haircut sermon series. That's the place where we would sit when Derek would come to my house and study the Bible with me. And then I went through a bunch of Revelation seminars. I think I went through 2 and then later a third one. Revelation seminars, and embraced the message. I'm going to share with you something. One of the things that first made me open to Christianity was the fear of hell. One of my buddies from high school, I hadn't seen him for years, we reconnected, and he said, "Hey, what have you been up to?" And I said, "Well, you know, this, that, and the other thing." And I said, he said, "Well, I've been studying martial arts, studying some karate." I said, "Oh, me too, you should come to my school." And so he came to our place, and after class one time, we were sitting in his car in the parking lot, and he said, "You know, I've been working with this Baptist guy, and he told me how terrible hell is going to be." He said, "People joke that they'll be in hell with all their friends, but you know, the only thing you're going to hear is their screams of torment. Well, you also are screaming in pain and torment for all eternity." And I said, "John, that sounds really bad. I don't think it's worth it for us to live one life of sin if we're going to suffer for all eternity because of it." And so we were kind of both open to Christianity because we were scared of hell. You know, hell can be a motivator. Fear of punishment, Ellen White says. That's the lowest motivation. Then hope of reward. The Bible speaks about hell for a reason. It also speaks about heaven. So there's fear of punishment, there's hope of reward, but Ellen White says the greatest motivation to serve God is because you love Him because of what He's done for you. But I was at that level where I was looking for a fire escape religion. I did not want to burn in hell. Those Revelation seminars were good stuff. And the night that we studied hell and the state of the dead, I was flying high. I love hell. I mean, I love our doctrine of hell. Our understanding of hell is precious. Do you know that a person who grows up with the misunderstanding of hell, where if somehow God is going to be content to torment people for all eternity in a dark corner of the universe, while the rest of us live blissfully for all eternity, that's a horrible picture of our Heavenly Father. And so when you hear the truth about hell, it's beautiful. I literally shared this with a neighbor a couple of years ago. My son was setting off fireworks in the neighborhood illegally. And somebody came out, and our neighbor that I'd never met was visiting her parents that were our neighbors. And she said, "I grew up in the Baptist church. I left years ago." She's kind of into yoga and stuff now. And we got to talking. And somehow we got onto hell and the state of the dead. And when I shared that with her, she said, "You have given me a reason to reconsider Christianity." She turned her back on God because she didn't like the teaching of hell in the Baptist church that she grew up in. So, it's a beautiful doctrine. I'm driving home on a rainy Monday night after one of those Revelation seminar meetings with this new information about hell and the state of the dead. And I'm thinking, ooh, this is so good. I mean, I kind of knew it. Susan had shared something of it. Now it all just fit and it made sense. And I was so moved by it. In my head, almost like out loud, I'm saying, people need to know this. I might have said it out loud as I'm driving home. But people need to know this. And I heard this voice very clearly, not audibly, but like someone said it in my head. Like it was sounding between my ears. And the voice said, "Yes, they do." And rather than reacting with startled surprise, I simply engaged in the conversation. And I said, "But who's going to tell them?" And the voice said, "You can tell them." And that was the end of the conversation. I thought, whoa, what just happened? And so I considered that my call to the ministry. So when that conference president told me that I should question my call to the ministry when he fired me, I said, "I know what I experienced." I didn't tell him that, but I knew what I experienced when God called me to ministry. So I got excited. One of the things that I had fallen for before this, and believe me, Satan's deceptions in the end time, one of the greatest ones is going to be regarding the state of the dead. You know, I carry tracts around. I left I usually carry 2 in particular. I left my last 2 at the hotel room this morning, and one of them was the other. I have 2 at the same time, but I carry Signs of the Times, What Happens When You Die, and the one on Daniel 2's image. Because if people can see that you can trust Scripture based on what Daniel 2's prophecies show, and if they know the truth about what happens when you die, they are already ahead of the game to be prepared for the deceptions that Satan will use. When Grandma shows up to tell you that God wants you to worship on Sunday, and you know that Grandma's sleeping in the grave, you're not going to fall for that, right? So, a couple weeks after my mom had died, December 26, 1980, my senior year of high school, 2 days before my 17th birthday, she died, and I was missing her so much. It was January, mid-January. I went to bed missing her, and that night my mother appeared to me in a dream. It wasn't like a dream. It was like she really came to talk to me. So real that I woke up. I have it at home. I think it was January 19. I wrote down the date, and I wrote down everything she said to me. And she said she had been to heaven, or she's in heaven. She met her parents. They showed her the light. She came back. They told her everything's all right, and she came back to tell me everything's all right. And it was this peaceful feeling I had, 17 years old. And Mom had come to visit me and tell me everything's all right. So now I knew that can't be true, because I had just studied the Bible. Now I had to make a decision. When I was confronted with Bible truth, I had to decide, do I trust my precious experience when my mother came and appeared to me, or do I trust the Word of God? I said, I trust God's Word, and whatever I experienced, it wasn't my mother. That was Satan's deception. I'm much more at peace now knowing that my mother wasn't watching me from heaven as I went through all that misery. Long story short, I ended up at Weimar College when, not knowing anybody there, just went because it seemed like the right place for me as a vegan. I went and visited some other college campuses, and when I went to their cafeterias, I said, this is never going to work. And in the city, you know, sirens going in the middle of the night, and the kid next door blasting rock music. I said, this country boy in Pennsylvania won't work out here, and the vegan diet and everything. So I ended up at Weimar, flew across the country, and had a beautiful 4-year experience where I was nurtured and grew as a baby Christian. But one of those, the first summer I came back, and I walked into the local IGA store. Anybody know what an IGA is? Independent Grocers Alliance. My first job, just about cut my finger off here on the meat saw in the butcher shop, and I have a split nail still to this day with a big scar here. But I went to a local IGA, and I saw this lady, and they call her Mrs. Michaels. Her son and I used to do drugs together. And I recognized her. And what I remember is that when my mother was dying and I was out, because I couldn't stand to see her dying, I was out riding on the trails on a mini bike or whatever, she was coming because they had a mutual friend that connected them. And Mrs. Marks and another lady were coming and praying for my mother while she was dying, sharing Jesus with her. Well, I meet Mrs. Marks. I recognize her. As I said, her son and I used to do drugs together. And I just said hello. She was working in the produce department. She was carrying heads of lettuce. She had her arms full with heads of lettuce. And Mrs. Marks didn't recognize me, because remember the picture she saw me this morning? That's how I looked the last time she saw me. Now my hair is about a foot shorter and cleaned up. And I said, hello, Mrs. I said her name, didn't I? I was saying Michaels. Hello, Mrs. Michaels. And she just looked at me like, I don't know who you are. And I said, I'm Nathan Krause. And she said, oh, hi, how are you? And I didn't think about it. It just came out of my mouth. I said, I'm a Christian today, Mrs. Michaels. She dropped those heads of lettuce, and they were rolling on the floor. And people were looking like, what is going on? And then Mrs. Michaels was about this tall and about this wide. And she came at me like she was going to tackle me. I thought, oh no. And she just grabbed me, wrapped her arms around me, and she held me, and she began to rock, and she began to weep on my shoulder. And she said, you don't know how much your mother prayed for me. And I said, Mrs. Michaels, 5 years after her death, her prayers were answered for me. And then she said, oh, she's so happy up in heaven right now. And I said, no, Mrs. Michaels, my understanding of Scripture is she's sleeping in the grave waiting for Jesus to come. But there will be a joyful reunion when Jesus comes to take us home. She's going to be surprised to see her wayward son, who was a long-haired druggie, and she worried so much about me. Everybody tells me afterward that her prayers were answered. I want to tell you something, moms, dads, grandmas and grandpas. Your prayers for your kids are precious to Jesus. And you may not even live to see the answer to those prayers, but that doesn't mean that God's going to stop working. Now look, I don't claim to have it all figured out and know how it works, but here's a scenario that I've thought about. When you place yourself on Satan's territory, you're kind of making yourself unreachable. God can only impact you so much when you're not opening up your exposure to Him. But I envision it like this. I don't know what the rules of engagement are in this great controversy war, but I can imagine that when angels and the Holy Spirit showed up to work in my life, Satan could say, what are you doing here? He's mine. And they could respond. His mother prayed, and so we're here in answer to that prayer. I don't know, but I like to think that's how it worked out. So, listen, by your prayers, you're opening up opportunities for God to do something greater in somebody's life. Just by your prayers. Because when they haven't invited God into their life, you have. And God will answer your prayers. And He has a reason to be there in their life. Greater. Of course, He's drawing every heart. But when you pray, it's just like all the more influence to get into their life. And be there for them. So, my great hope is that every one of you will be present on that great resurrection morning when we all go home together. And I want to introduce you to my mom. You're going to love her. She is such a sweet lady, such a beautiful spirit. She never heard of a Seventh-day Adventist as far as I know, but she died trusting in Jesus Christ. I've read things that she's written afterward, tucked them in her Bible, and I found them. And Mom knew Jesus. What a precious hope we have as Seventh-day Adventists. What a beautiful message we have to share with the world. Let's focus on what really matters in this life. And that is helping prepare others for the world to come. If you've ever watched the movie Schindler's List, you know that at the very end, sorry to spoil it if you haven't watched it, but you should watch it if you haven't. It's a hard movie to watch, but it's worth watching. And you know, Arthur Schindler saved many Jews in the Holocaust. He didn't do much else in his life. He was not a great success in any areas, but that he did well. And at the end of the movie, he looks and he has a pin. I usually have my Texas Conference pin on here, but I left it on another jacket. He has a pin, a lapel pin on his shirt, his jacket, I mean. And it says, why did I keep this pin? If I had sold it, I could have employed 2 more people. This car. What do I? Because he's seeing all the people who were saved because of him employing them at the end of the war. They're saved. And he's looking at people and comparing people to stuff. He's saying, if I had sold this, I could have employed 4. If I had gotten rid of this. And he starts putting it all in perspective where he sees people are what matter, not things. And I just pray that we don't get to heaven and I say, what if I had fill in the blank? How many more might have been saved? If only I had. I don't want to have that experience when I get to heaven. Let's live on purpose. Let's live intentionally. Let's save souls for Jesus. Let's do this precious work that He's committed to us. Angels long to do it, but He says, nope, it's not your job. You can cooperate with them when they go out to do it. So let's get the angels busy. Let's go out and have them come and join us to share the beautiful message of Jesus and the Advent truth with the world that's dying to hear it. Father in heaven, you